But that's good. 1 Kings chapter 12. 1 Kings chapter 12. I'm excited. We're getting back into our King study. If you have your prayer sheet, you can be able to write down these things as we go through here tonight. But I'm excited about being back in the Kings. We've had a great summer, enjoyed it, but I'm excited about the Kings and what we can learn tonight. And I don't think we're going to get through this all the way. We'll see. But tonight and next Wednesday night, we're going to do a little review and just some thoughts and things. I want to take you back to where we had this divided kingdom. You remember that the people of Israel cried out for a king, and Samuel was the priest at the time, the prophet, and on scene, and the people, Samuel got a little nervous about that, didn't like it, but God said, go ahead and let them have a king. So he anointed Saul to be the first king of Israel, and they had the nation was not divided, it was together. And he ruled over all of the tribes of Israel, all over the whole nation of Israel for 40 years. Then, of course, David came along. You remember David the king? Y'all ever heard of him? Saul went by the wayside. David the king came on board, and he reigned for 40 years over a united Israel. Then Solomon came on board, and Solomon reigned for 40 years over a united Israel. Now, we know that Saul, David, and Solomon all reigned for 40 years. Those are easy things to remember, all right? 40 years apiece. So the first 120 years that they had a king, it was just 3 kings over a united Israel. If you know anything about Solomon, you know at the end of his life, he fell away from God. He was the wisest man in the world for a long time. But then he started marrying a bunch of women. And it caused him to turn dumb. And I don't mean that because of the women necessarily, but it was because of their beliefs. Okay? They brought him down. And so anyhow, toward the end of his life, it was that. And basically, we were getting set up here for a divided kingdom. And so that's what happens here. Rehoboam, his son, after Solomon dies, Rehoboam takes over, but he doesn't last long. Does anybody remember how long it lasts? About 3 days. But anyhow, let's look at it. Verse 1, chapter 12, 1 Kings. We're just going to remind you tonight, we're going to go through these kings that we've studied and remind you of where we've been. We've been out of this for 3 months now, so we need to get back into it. And again, I'm excited about it. And Rehoboam went to Shechem. We talked a lot about Shechem. For all Israel were come to Shechem to make him king. And it came to pass when Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who was yet in Egypt, heard of it, for he was fled from the presence of King Solomon, and Jeroboam dwelt in Egypt, that they sent and called him, Jeroboam. And Jeroboam and all the congregation of Israel came and spake unto Rehoboam, saying, Thy father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore make thou the grievous service of thy father and his heavy yoke which he put upon us lighter, and we will serve thee. Take it easy on us, Rehoboam. Your daddy was hard. We'll follow you if you do. And he said, verse 5, Depart yet for 3 days, then come again to me. He said, Let me think on this for 3 days. And the people departed. Verse 6, And King Rehoboam consulted with the old men. We have any old men here tonight? Okay, we got a few. All right, he went and consulted with the old men that stood before Solomon his father while he yet lived, and said, How do ye advise that I may answer this people? And they spake unto him, saying, If thou wilt be a servant unto this people this day, and will serve them, is that not what a king and leaders are supposed to do? It says, Serve, and answer them, and speak good words to them, then they will be thy servants forever. But he forsook the counsel of the old men, which they had given him, and consulted with the young men that were grown up with him, and which stood before him. We have any young men here tonight? Okay, there you go. And he said unto them, he said to the young men, he said, What counsel give ye that we may answer this people who have spoken to me, saying, Make the yoke which thy father did put upon us lighter? Verse 10, And the young men that were grown up with him spake unto him, saying, Thus shalt thou speak unto this people that spake unto thee, saying, Thy father made our yoke heavy, but make thou lighter upon us. Then thus shalt thou say unto them, My little finger shall be thicker than my father's loins, or thighs. And now whereas my father did lade you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father hath chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the third day, as the king had appointed, saying, Come to me again the third day. And the king answered the people roughly, and forsook the old man's counsel that they gave him. It helps to have some old men around to talk to, let me tell you. And spake to them after the counsel of the young men, saying, My father made your yoke heavy, and I will add to your yoke. My father also chastised you with whips, I will chastise you with scorpions. Wherefore the king hearkened not unto the people, for the cause was from the Lord, that he might perform his saying, which the Lord spake by Ahijah the Shilonite unto Jeroboam the son of Nebat. So when all Israel saw that the king hearkened not unto them, the people answered the king, saying, What portion have we in David? Neither have we any inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Now see to thine own house, David. So Israel departed unto their tents. But as for the children of Israel, which dwell in the cities of Judah, Rehoboam reigned over them. All right, so we go back all the way to the beginning of the divided kingdom. That's what we've been studying for 9 months last school year. Took the summer off, and we're back to it again. So we take you back to where we started a year ago now, talking about the divided kingdom and how it got divided. So now you remember the story, how that we had Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and how it all got divided. Now, what we're going to do tonight is we're going to go down, and you can fill in the blanks as you go through, but we're going to go by each king that we have studied so far and remind you just a few tidbits about them and tell you a little bit about them. All right, first of all, we're going to go to the northern kingdom, all right, the northern kingdom, and we're going to talk about Jeroboam. By the way, how many kings in the north were good? Does anybody remember? Zero, nada, none. They were all bad, every one of them. Now, some of them had a little bit of good points, but most of them had 0 good points. They were all bad. All right, Jeroboam. You remember, of course, that again he actually worked for King Solomon, but the king was going to kill him when he found out that what Ahijah had said, that they were going to divide the kingdom and Jeroboam was going to be the new king. And of course, Jeroboam, we read about him here just now, he led the revolt of the 10 tribes at Shechem. So Jeroboam, the first king of the northern kingdom after it was divided, he took the 10 tribes to the north and set up shop in Shechem. Now, Jeroboam was known for setting up a false religion. That is the big thing that Jeroboam was known for, setting up his own religion. He told those folks, he said, listen, it is just too much. It's too much for you to go down to Jerusalem to worship. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up these 2 golden calves here, one in Dan up in the north, one in Bethel in the south of the northern kingdom. And he said, that's your gods. That's the things that you need to worship. Now, if you remember when we talked about Jeroboam, we told you he changed 4 things. He changed the object of their worship. They used to worship Jehovah God. Now they're worshiping 2 golden calves. He changed the place of their worship. The place of their worship was supposed to be in the temple at Jerusalem. And Jeroboam changed it to Bethel and Dan. He tried to make religion convenient for the people. He changed the priesthood. You remember there was only certain people that were supposed to be priests. The tribe of Levi were supposed to be the priest. Well, you know what old Jeroboam did? He said, anybody that wants to be a priest, just apply. And they had a bunch of scoundrels amongst the group. A bunch of people that you wouldn't even want to be priests or preachers. But they were. And he said, come on in, boys. Yeah, y'all going to be the new priest around here. We're going to worship. And he changed the time. You remember he changed the time of the Feast of the Tabernacles and all the different things that he changed so that he could have these people worship with him and not go back to Jerusalem, for he feared that if they went back to Jerusalem, then Rehoboam would win their hearts back, and so he set up his own false religion. Now, we know there was a prophet that was sent to one of his false altars, and his false altar was destroyed. You remember when the prophet showed up, and he told Jeroboam that God was not pleased with him, and God was going to destroy him and destroy even his family and things. And you remember Jeroboam stuck out his hand and said, "Go get that guy." What happened to his hand? It just went limp. It just was paralyzed. Just was paralyzed. He was walking around here. I don't know. I can't remember if it was his right arm. I don't think it said right arm. But I mean, he walked around here and couldn't even use it. It was paralyzed. And then he said, oh, please, 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 ask God to change it. Ask God to change it. And the prophet said, okay. God changed his other one like this paralyzed one. That's what I'd have prayed. Y'all, a bunch of pious people sitting out there. No, he prayed. He said, Lord, restore his arm. And he did. But you remember that his son was stricken by God. And all of these things, of course, as punishment for his sin. Jeroboam was defeated in battle by Abijah, the second king of the south. And you remember that Jeroboam was stricken with a plague from God and died. He ruled for 22 years. There was only two guys in the north that ruled for 22 years. Jeroboam, does anybody remember the second one? Ahab, that's exactly right, Ahab. The two worst. Now, we preached a message about Jeroboam and the sins of Jeroboam, you remember? The sins of Jeroboam. Every king that followed after him, they talked about how he followed in the sins of Jeroboam. Don't tell me you don't have influence on the next one that comes up, and the next one after that, and the next one after that, and the next one after that. You know what somebody could have done? I preached about this, of course. Somebody should have woke up one day and say, hey, my granddaddy was a heathen, my daddy was a heathen, but I'm going to break the cycle. I'm going to break it. I'm not going to be a heathen. I'm not going to be a heathen. But none of them did. And of course, not all their sons actually reigned. But anyhow, that's the way it goes. All right. Secondly, we have Nadab. Nadab, this was Jeroboam's son. And you can see all this up here. And he was assassinated by Baasha, who ended up being the next king, of course. Nadab was the first of 6 northern kings to be murdered while in office. Boy, that's a fine place to be living, isn't it? And he ruled for how many years? A whopping 2 before they killed him. Y'all think he was sorry and good for nothing? Yes, he was. Nadab. Okay, so we have Nadab. So we have Jeroboam, and then we have Nadab. Not a whole lot to say about Nadab. So there you go. Next, we have Baasha. Baasha. He actually fulfilled the prophecy that was given to Jeroboam's wife when they went to see Ahijah the prophet. And killing Nadab and his relatives. And again, we're not going to go into all of this. This afternoon, I just sat down and I read all through 1 Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles, what we had studied so far, just to give myself a review. And it's a good thing. And if you have time this week, maybe you could do that on some of these matters. Anyhow, Baasha declared war on Asa, who was the 3rd king of Judah, and began building a walled fortress at Ramah to control the road to Judah, thus hoping to cut off all trade to Jerusalem. But of course, it did not work. It did not work, but that was what he tried to do. He was rejected. Baasha, this was not Jeroboam or Nadab's son, of course. This was a new king, but he was rejected by God because of his sin. And it was predicted by the prophet Jehu that Baasha would have the same thing happen to him that Jeroboam did. And sure enough, that came to pass. Baasha did rule for 24 years, however. And so that's interesting in and of itself, that he lasted that long. Next, we have Elah. Y'all remember Elah? He was the son of Baasha. So Baasha's son Elah reigns. He was assassinated by a man by the name of Zimri, who was the commander of his royal chariot troops. Elah was drunk at the time. Turn over to 1 Kings 16. Look at verse number 8. The 26th year of Asa, king of Judah, began Elah, the son of Baasha, to reign over Israel in Tirzah 2 years. And his servant Zimri, captain of half his chariots, conspired against him as he was in Tirzah, drinking himself drunk in the house of Arzah, steward of his house in Tirzah. And Zimri went in and smote him and killed him in the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, and reigned in his stead. All right, so Elah lasted 2 years. He was just a drunk, basically, and not much of a king at all as well. Then we have Zimri. Zimri comes into play. Zimri, he slaughtered all the seed of Baasha. He fulfilled Jehu's prophecy. Zimri was the guy that lasted just 7 days, though. Y'all remember that? We had a king that just lasted 7 days. He was trapped by Omri. So he's Zimri, trapped by Omri, Israel's new commander-in-chief. And you know what Zimri said? Well, you know what we're going to do since I'm trapped in here? We're just going to set this place on fire, and I'm just going to sit here and I'm just going to burn up. And that's exactly what he did. He set the palace on fire and just sat there. Just sat there while it all burned down. He said, I'm not going to let the guy get to me. So he committed suicide by fire, which that's hard to take, no doubt about it. All right, then we have Omri. You remember Omri? Omri was known for moving the northern capital from Tirzah to Samaria. Jeroboam had started in Shechem, moved to Tirzah, and then now to Samaria, and that's where it stayed the rest of the time. And you hear a lot about Samaria. Omri was the guy who set up the political marriage between his son Ahab and the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, Jezebel. I am telling you, a match, and we preached on it, a match made in hell. No doubt about it. Ahab and Jezebel. Anyhow, Omri was Ahab's daddy. And would you teenagers like to have arranged marriages? No. Harley? I think your mama could probably do as good a job, not better than probably what you could do. What you think? You want her to pick out your wife one day? Okay, all right. How about you, Rachel? You want your mom and dad? You're gonna try it yourself? Maybe Grandpa. Maybe Grandpa. Allie? Okay, all right. All right, well, just think about that. That's what they did in those days. And anyhow, he ruled for 12 years. Now this is what I want you to remember about Omri. I preached a message about this. The Bible says very little about this man. The Bible says very little about Omri. But if you read secular history, you'll realize that Omri was a great military commander. He was a great military commander. Matter of fact, his name is in a museum on a stone that the Moabites made that talked about the land of Omri and how that Omri was a great military commander and had invaded Moab and had basically taken over Moab. Moab was basically subservient to him and other nations around. So if you read secular history, you see that Omri was a man that was highly esteemed in man's eyes. But I want you to remember that I told you in that message that God says nothing in the Bible about Omri's military conquest. Nothing. Nothing. Now, and God doesn't applaud him. So here's the lesson. Sometimes man esteems people way up here, but God is not impressed. And the opposite is true as well. When mankind does not esteem certain people, God may very well be impressed with them. Always remember that. And always remember that not everything is the way it seems. And God always knows. Listen, God always knows. I've met people, you've met people, man, you say, man, they've got personality, they charismatic, they just got everything together. And then you find out about them and they ain't got nothing together. We can be duped. We can be tricked, but God can't. And aren't you glad that God's going to be the one to do the final judging anyhow? He's the one that's going to do the final judging. I'm glad I don't have to do it. He's going to be the one. Man was impressed with him, but God was not impressed because he didn't say anything about it. Didn't say anything about it. Then we have the worst ever. Ahab. They just kind of been progressively getting worse, and then all of a sudden we get to Ahab and Jezebel, and I'm telling you what a mess. What a mess. He actually defeated the Syrians on a couple of occasions. But you remember the prophet that was brought out at this time to talk to Ahab? You remember what his name was? Elijah. Elijah appeared out of nowhere. And what did he tell Ahab? He said, buddy, it's not going to rain here for 3.5 years. Or it's not going to rain till I say so. Ahab was known for his Baal worship. Jezebel brought that in. They killed Naboth. You remember Ahab looked out there at Naboth's vineyard and he said, oh, I'd love to have that. He went to Naboth and said, listen, I'll trade you another one. I'll give you this, give you that. And Naboth said, no, that's been in our family. That's our family land. We're not going to sell that. We're not going to give it away. We're not going to get involved in any kind of trade. Ahab comes back. What's he do? Poochy lip, they call it. Pout. And Jezebel says, honey, what's wrong? Oh, that Naboth down there, he won't let me have that land over there. She said, I'll get it for you. So she goes out and hires some people to lie about him. Hires some people to lie at a trial, and guess what? They ended up killing him. And Elijah came to him and said, you're really in trouble now, boys and girls. He denounced them for his part in the murder of Naboth. He spared the life of a godless Syrian king. He tricked godly King Jehoshaphat into a twofold compromise. Number one, they ended up marrying off Athaliah to Joram. And we had, you remember we had the cards up here and all that kind of stuff. We'll talk about that later. And then a military alliance. They went to war against Syria. Elijah talked about Jezebel, predicted her death, that the dogs were going to, lick your blood. And that's exactly what happened. His own death predicted by both Elijah and the prophet Micaiah. He was slain in battle with the Syrians. You remember how he went out with Jehoshaphat and he told Jehoshaphat, here, you wear the king's clothes. What a bad guy. He said, you wear the king's clothes. And you remember the Syrians said, okay, we're only after the king of Israel. If you see him, everybody go for him. Well, he got out there and sure enough, they were going to come around Jehoshaphat. He said, oh, no, it's not me, not me. Ahab was out there, he looked like a normal guy. All of a sudden, an arrow, the Bible talks about how a guy just pointed an arrow up and just shot it in the air. He was just shooting for the fun of it. Maybe I'll hit somebody, maybe I won't. And sure enough, there it comes, right into Ahab. And he died out there on the battlefield. He ruled for 22 years. So, you will eventually, we always think, and of course Jezebel got hers. They fling her down, boys, fling her down. And they flung her down, and Jehu just drove back and forth over her, and then the dogs come and took care of the rest of it. But anyhow, we always look around and we say, well, it looks like people are getting away with things and all this kind of stuff. Listen, God takes care of everything in due time. Don't you worry about it. God takes care of everything in due time. Okay, then next we have Ahab's son Ahaziah, the oldest son of Ahab and Jezebel. He was the one that got Jehoshaphat again into another enterprise, a shipbuilding enterprise this time that ended up failing. Remember, all the ships just sunk. I don't think God was in that. He suffered a severe and later fatal fall in his palace at Samaria. And you remember he turned to Beelzebub for healing. And he said, y'all go inquire of Beelzebub and see if I'm going to get well. And that's when Elijah came to him and said, listen here, buddy. Why did you turn to false God instead of the true God? And he said, you are going to die. And you remember Elijah walked away, and Ahaziah said, okay, I want you boys to go get him. Remember he was up on a mount? You remember 50 soldiers showed up. And they said, are you Elijah? He said, yeah. He said, you boys getting ready to disappear. 50 of them died right there on the spot. They sent 50 more. That next 50, you Elijah? Yeah. He said, you boys in trouble. Y'all getting ready to disappear. They died right on the spot. Sent another 50. You know what that guy, the captain of that 50 said? Please, Mr. Elijah, please, just come with us, please. He said, okay, I'll come with you. That was Ahaziah. Ended up dying, and he ruled for 2 years. He was another fine one. And then we had Jehoram. He was the youngest son of Ahab. This is where Ahaziah's son did not take over, but Jehoram, Ahab's son, took over. And he also got Jehoshaphat into an alliance with him. And Elisha worked a miracle on the battlefield. The Moabites were taken out. This was the guy that Elisha would go and tell the king that Syria was going to ambush you in a certain place. You remember the Syrian king said, all right, which one of y'all is telling the king of Israel where we're going to be? Because I wanted to get him, and we've got a spy in here or something. And one of them said, oh no, it's not one of us, it's Elisha the prophet. And they said, okay, well I want to go get him. And this is what the king of Syria said. He said, he knows what I say, even in my bedchamber, my bedroom. Well, it was God telling him. It was God telling him that. By the way, God knows everything about y'all too, okay? God knows what you say, what you think. He knows all that. Then, of course, the Syrians were not slaughtered. Remember, they all got blinded, and he led them all to the capital city, and they opened their eyes, and here they were in Samaria. And the king said, okay, let's kill them all. And Elisha said, no, we're not going to do that. It was Jehoram who was on the throne when God used the 4 lepers to save the city of Samaria. You remember that they had surrounded them. And people were dying of starvation. They were eating stuff that we can't even imagine. He was also the king with whom the Syrian leper Naaman met. And then he was later murdered by Jehu in the valley of Jezreel. He ruled for 12 years. And then we have Jehu. We have just enough time to finish it. This guy was anointed. This is the last of the northern kingdoms that we have studied, all right, so far. We didn't study him in totality, but we mentioned him enough. He was anointed by Elisha, ordered to execute the dynasty of Ahab, which included Jehoram and Jezebel. He did it. We can applaud him for that. He rode his chariot in the valley of Jezreel, where he executed Jehoram, Ahaziah, the 6th king, not to be confused with Ahaziah, who was Jehoram's older brother. He then made his way to the city of Jezreel, killed Jezebel. After this, he demanded and received the heads of the 70 sons of Ahab who were living in the city of Samaria. He continued his blood purge by slaying even the descendants and friends of Ahab. Got rid of them. And then even killed the priest of Baal. So there was a slight little revival going on here for a little while. But then he turned off, of course, to be bad. They were all bad. But he did rule for 28 years and did some good things. But overall, it was a bad reign. Now, you know, when you think about the northern kingdom, you think about the southern kingdom, you got to realize that God rules everywhere too. And God is coming back to set it all straight. There's messes everywhere all over the world. God's going to set it all straight. Every nation, however, is responsible to God. Did you know that? Every nation is responsible for God, to God, according to its opportunity and its enlightenment. And, you know, we're reminded again that God will judge those who do evil. He will do it. Maybe not on our timetable, but He will do it. He will do it. Why does God do that? Because He wants you to be reminded that sin is bad and that sin will take you to hell if you don't repent of your sin. Why does God send some of these things? So that people will look to Him and repent of their sin and their wrongdoing.